What's New Podcast here with Thomas Laird. And the goal of today is from folks within the New Society Collective, what are interesting projects and ideas? As you and I are talking, this is unfolding as something remarkable. First, Thomas, you are a New Orleans photographer and writer. You were based in Asia for decades, and some of your photography has been published globally in the New York Times, Time Magazine, National Geographic, and many others. What's interesting about this is that you have built a relationship with the Dalai Lama, and it all started with a cold call. Tell me about
Well,
your inspiration.
in the 1990s, the thing about my work, all that work is self-assigned. I didn't do commissioned work. I very rarely did commissioned work. When I was shooting those stories when I would shoot a photograph for National Geographic, they would come to me and they would say, "Do you have a photograph of something?" And I would say, "Yeah, I have that." Or, I would create a story about Tibetan murals and sell it to a magazine, and they didn't know in advance that they wanted the story until they saw my story. So I lived in Nepal, based in Nepal for 35 years, and I made a living selling stories. So I was a freelancer. I was working with Asia Week in Nepal in the early 1990s. At the same time, I was working on a book about the death of the first CIA agent. And so I went, and I called up the Dalai Lama's office and said, "I'm the Asia Week representative for Asia Week, and I'm doing a book about the death of Douglas McKiernan, the first star on the wall at the CIA. He's the first CIA officer ever killed." And the Dalai Lama had met him when he was about 16 years old. He met the survivors of the McKiernan party, the people who were not shot. And so when I called up the office and said, "Did the Dalai Lama realize these people were CIA agents, the survivors?" And the officers in his cabinet said, "We don't know, you have to ask him." So they mentioned my work to the Dalai Lama, and he agreed to an interview. And during the first interview, I began not to just talk about the death of the first CIA agent, but I began to show him photographs of Tibetan murals that I was also shooting. So we developed a friendship, and yes, I'm a Buddhist, but I didn't approach him as a Buddhist disciple. I approached him as a journalist. And so when we would talk about subjects, I would bring up something, I would say, "Well, so-and-so says this," and he would say, "No, I didn't agree with that." And I said, "Well, it's written here in this book." So we would go back and forth. We would argue. He would see it as work. And I was the only one that was approaching him like this. I didn't approach him as a devotee. I didn't approach him as a student. I have tremendous respect for him. But I think it was the way I approached him that made the difference.
So you did a collaboration, the largest book, published in Louisiana.
Right, since Audubon. Yeah.
The most expensive at $12,000 for the
Right.
book. Tell me more about it.
So I went to Tibet and I began photographing the murals. That took years. So I'm doing these
And
expeditions.
the murals, these are large murals.
These are murals as large as that wall, and larger. Some of my images are 16 by 60 feet in a single photograph. So that's no longer a photograph. Okay, these are digital master files. It's a PSB file. It's a 55 gigabyte PSB file. These are enormous. And when when you blow up an image and you look at it, you see pixels. When you blow these images up and you go to pixel level, there's no pixel.
So the only way to really observe it or to feel it is to see it. And now there's an opportunity. So
Exactly. Before my work, you had to go to Tibet to try to see these murals. And now I can print them at life size. I can project them in immersive shows. I can put them in VR. There's a lot of different things we can do with them. Once you have a life-size image capture, the number of things you can do is immense. That book you see is 29 by 20 inches or something. It's that big because it's the only way you can see anything of a mural that's 10 by 10 feet. If you put a 10 by 10 foot mural on a smaller book, you don't see anything. So if you really want to capture what's there hidden in Tibet for the last 1,000 years and save it for future generations, you have to do it at life size. And if you're going to do it at all that life size, then you have to have a really big book to even begin to see what's there.
tell me how technology, the evolution of technology, is now making this
Possible.
possible.
Yeah. So when I began in 1986, I was shooting the murals on slide. And then we would have to scan, and then in the 90s, I began to scan them. And then by the early 2000, I could stitch together a few of those frames. But during that whole process, we didn't have much RAM. You know, in the beginning, if you had 50 megabytes of RAM, that was a lot of RAM. Well, but my computer today, I have, you know, like 500 gigabyte of RAM, you know, to be able to stitch together hundreds of these images. So in the beginning, we were working on film, and you couldn't stitch the images except in a dark room. And by the end of this, I'm creating digital images of small sections of the mural and then editing them together in Photoshop. And I'm doing it in a very precise grid so that I'm always 18-inch from the wall. The cameras, you know, I'm always using the same lens. I'm always getting the same light. So for a big mural, 10 by 10 foot, or bigger, 10 by 20 foot, I might shoot 1,000 images. And then you have to edit all of those together into a single image.
And tell me, where does, in your mind, AI, blockchain?
So that's really where this is headed. As I watched people struggling with blockchain during the last few years, I was very interested in it as a way to authenticate, and not so much as a way, eventually there could be value created, but for me, if I have a master digital file that is 50 gigabyte, and I want to ensure its preservation for the next 1,000 years, one way to do that would be to break up the master file into 100 slices. So I captured this by creating all these small slices. Now I'm proposing to cut it up again and create the pieces and then put these individual and sell ownership of the master digital file in 100 pieces to different collectors all over the world. Basically doing the same thing I proposed to the Dalai Lama. Through greed, you preserve the heritage of Tibet. You know, by monetizing this, by making collectors. Right now, people see my work as, oh, it's photographs of Tibetan murals. It's not. I'm doing something completely different. I mean, 100 years from now, the only images that will exist of some of these murals are the things I created during the last 20 years. They're gone. The murals are gone. And so the life-size images aren't really a photograph. They're content for platforms not yet invented. So when I was first started doing this, VR wasn't really there. You know, blockchain wasn't really there. But now we can see that there are ways to present the murals of Tibet in VR. There are ways to preserve the digital files on blockchain. And going forward, I can see ways where I could take my art. So I created images of more than 300 murals painted during the last 1,000 years. So, and they've got every topic under the beginning of the world, you know, birth of a human being, death, reincarnation, the maps of Lhasa. I mean, the whole world is there in these murals. If we train an AI with this archive and then feed it Tibetan historic text, you could literally create visualizations of Tibetan history and different events in the style of the murals. So there's many things coming down the pipe at us. I think in the same way that when I confronted the murals of Tibet and realized that there were new tools to capture them, now I'm realizing that there are new tools to transmit them to the future and to share them with the public. And VR, AI, definitely the preservation of content will, I think, be caught up particularly in AI and VR and blockchain. You know how we trade stocks on Wall Street. People could be trading high resolution images as a commodity. And so rather than that being preserved by the Library of Congress, it's preserved through a marketplace.
Aren't those NFTs now?
That's exactly, yes.
One day that word's gonna go away, but it's gonna be something cooler, but
Yeah.
isn't that the basic?
That's the basic idea behind NFT.
Someone's gonna look at this 1,000 years from now and, yeah, oh my gosh, that's visionary. That to put, of course, the art on blockchain and the way it's traded. Right now, we're in this crazy early stage where it's
Yes.
what, is this where all art is going in your mind?
See, I see
What do you
blockchain.
Because you're in the middle of it, what do you see?
I see blockchain as a tool. You know, a lot of people see blockchain as a investment device. I see it as a tool for authentication, for preservation. Internet preservation, digital preservation is very fragile. Something is only preserved. It has to be moved from platform to platform. So people were talking about their NFTs, and it's like, yeah, okay, what are you selling? Are you selling people a JPEG, a 3 megabyte JPEG? Yeah. Okay, that's one thing. But that's not the same thing as a 50 gigabyte PSB file that's 16 by 60 feet. You can't value these the same because that JPEG can only ever be blown up into an 8 by 10 photograph. That's it. Whereas my PSB files can be blown up and printed as 16 by 60 foot fine art prints. It's a totally different character.
This will be the only true record of these murals 1,000 years from now.
You know, with various large archives, where should my archive go? And until now, photographic archives are preserved by institutions. But, you know, I'm not certain that 300 years from now, the Library of Congress will be where the digital archives of the 20th century survived at. I think there may be, we're looking at the emergence of new ways for data to be valued and preserved.
If I'm leaving here, going to one of the many holiday parties over the next couple weeks, what would I say? Like, what would you want me to say to somebody? Gosh, I just had this most remarkable conversation with Thomas Laird. He's a photographer, writer from New Orleans, and give me the next 2 sentences of it.
He spent his life in the Himalayas creating images of Tibetan murals and collecting stories of the people that live there, creating some really unique books, the likes of which have never been seen, and setting up an archive to do many other projects coming at us over the next few years.
And he's just come out with the largest book since Audubon,
Yeah.
and the most expensive book.
Yeah.
And
The price just went up from 10,000 to 12,000. There's only a couple hundred copies left.
where can you buy that?
You can go online to Taschen.com, and TASCHEN, Taschen.com, and they're for sale there from Benedict Taschen.